Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're doing a review of chapter 1066. This is a really important chapter. Very big chapter. Lots to talk about, even though it goes quite slowly. It's just it's so overwhelming with the number of things I'm trying to connect in my head. But before we do that, even more importantly than the greatest secrets in all of One Piece, today is Zoro's birthday. In our world, not really in their world, I don't think. So, happy birthday, Zoro, my favorite One Piece character, as you can probably tell. So yeah, just throw him some booze or challenge him to a sword fight or whatever suits you best. But just wish him a happy birthday today. Now, let's get into the chapter. So let's start with the cover chapter for today, which is back to the Germa Kingdom. Well, we've been with the Germa Kingdom for a little while now, but we've been at Totoland. But now they've actually returned with Caesar back to their big snail ship. So I read this chapter quite early in the morning. From the first minute I'm conscious on a Friday morning, I always check if the chapter is up, and today it was. And because I read this very early in the morning, I glanced through this cover chapter because as I started to get into the chapter, it started to get a little bit crazier and I had to start slowing down more. But even from reading the title, I was so hooked into this chapter that I just kind of glossed over a few things. So we're going to go a little bit slower now and talk about it. The first thing that I noticed upon my second, third, fourth reread today is that you can actually see the Vinsmoke four of the Vinsmoke children coming back to Germa with Caesar with them flying through the air. Completely glazed over this at first because I just thought, yep, Germa are there, great, they're still alive, keep going. But upon re-looking at it, it's quite interesting because all of the snails that are actually pulling the ship, are they the ship or are they pulling the ship? The snail is the sluggy part, not the shell. It just contains a shell. So they are the ship. Okay, so the snail ship parts are just kind of all looking at them returning back, which, I mean, they're good lookouts. You can see, like I did, when they see something, you know that there's something to look out for, I suppose. But they don't really seem very defensive or offensive. They can't really defend Germa much. They just kind of exist and carry things on their back, but that's fine. But because the snails are all looking up at them, that made me actually investigate a little bit closer, and then I noticed Caesar in them. So read slowly, there's lots to find in One Piece, but it's quite cool. We know that they are now safely arriving back to the Germa's kingdom, home base, ship. They're back safely and they have brought Caesar with them, and because Judge and Caesar are both former Vegapunk scientists under the Mads name with Queen as well, possibly one or other two people, we do know that Judge and Caesar are acquainted, so this is a pretty good place for Caesar to go. He's probably still going to be exploited, but at least he'll be slightly happier about it because he's also with other evil mad scientists now, so that's kind of cool. So now let's get into the actual chapter. So we are cutting straight back to where Vegapunk and Frankie and a few of the other Straw Hats were talking in the last chapter, and Vegapunk dropped the huge bomb of information that the ancient kingdom is not so ancient technology-wise, and that Egghead is actually just about on the same level, if not possibly a little bit behind the ancient kingdom from 900 years ago. And that was huge. That just opens so many doors. That just raises so many questions, and actually, for once, answers a few. I mean, it's not that we never answer questions, but we usually raise more than we answer. So we are cutting back right into that, and we learn some amazing stuff in this chapter. This chapter being the Will of Ohara. Not this Ohara and not the Arthur, but Ohara, like the tree one. Okay. We find out here that Vegapunk is actually acquainted, or rather was acquainted, with Professor Clover from the Ohara Kingdom. The Ohara. And that is very interesting to me. I didn't really consider that, especially because Clover died so long ago, and 22 years ago, and we only really saw him in Robin's scenes, and he seemed like a very important person on that island, but not that he would have had too much impact on the world, because I kind of assumed he was raised on Ohara and that's why people on that island were scholars or archaeologists. I kind of assumed it was almost like Wano. A lot of the best smiths in the world come from Wano because they're from Wano. That's what that island does. I never really thought O'Hara was a place that everyone gathered to, and that's why it became so well renowned for that. Maybe that's how everything works in the One Piece world. But anyway, we now know that Vegapunk knew Clover from all the way back in the day, because Clover used to actually be quite the rambunctious guy, and he would go out kind of like a pirate to sail and explore the world and discover new things and be a scholar. He used to be a lot more reckless about it. He used to actually have a ship and a crew and be out in the world. And it was only later on that he settled down. So Vegapunk refers to him as a man that was passionate about uncovering this ancient kingdom and was even willing to risk his life for it. So that's very, very interesting. He also mentions here that at a certain site, some technology was dug up that very much relates to the ancient kingdom. And that's very interesting, because that tells me, at least from what I can tell, that Clover being at O'Hara and that machine site island, that certain island where the machine, that's probably the one that Luffy found, was actually found, was not in fact the same place. Meaning that there was O'Hara who was discovering and trying to uncover the ancient kingdom. There was actually the ancient kingdom that had this amazing technology. And there was the place that this thing was found that was not the same as the other two. At least that's my understanding of it. And this gets a little bit more confusing, but I'll try and keep it together. So one of the weird things about this chapter particularly is there's a very big mix going on here. We have new facts being introduced to us by a somewhat new character who was just revealed in the story. Even though we've known about Vegapunk for a long time, he's actually here. We know what probably all of the Vegapunks look like now, but he's giving us a whole bunch of new facts that we've been waiting a long time for. That is mixed in with a whole bunch of facts that we already knew. So Vegapunk here is trying to confirm with Robin that the world government actually destroyed O'Hara because they were getting too close to understanding the ancient kingdom or revealing information about the ancient kingdom. And that's very unusual, and reading this chapter is very unusual for me, because we're mixing in a whole bunch of facts that we've heard so many times that we don't even question them, with things that we've also just been basing in conjecture ourselves, things that we've just been guessing at through evidence, very much like Vegapunk. So here Vegapunk is asking, did they get wiped out because they were researching the ancient kingdom? And well, if you ask most One Piece fans that pay attention and, have gotten to that point in the story where Robin explains O'Hara, or rather O'Hara is explained to us, it becomes very obvious to us that they were annihilated because they got too close to the ancient kingdom, because that was the preface of that whole story. They were researching, they got a little bit too close to the poneglyphs, kind of like Zeppo and the Jaguar Mink, Pedro. I can't believe I forgot Pedro's name. Anyways, I'm sorry, Pedro. Just because they were investigating poneglyphs, they got eradicated. So we know the existence of the ancient kingdom was a thing. We didn't know that they were advanced until now, but we knew that anyone who was trying to figure things like this out got eliminated. It's one of the very few basic things we know about the world government and their hardline stances. So it's very interesting for the smartest man in this world to have to get his hands on a bunch of information from a place that's been eradicated to even make that conjecture and confirm it with the living survivor. So that was a very weird feeling with me, because I felt a lot through this chapter, yeah, but we already knew that, and yes, but we kind of already knew that, mixed in with a whole lot of I never could have guessed that. So I was just trying to reread it a few times to get some solid ideas, and it's crazy. I'm asking so many more questions that I need to delve into more, but I just wanted to kind of mention it all in one place now, and give my thoughts on the chapter, because it is a very good chapter. It's just my brain is all over the place after this. So Vegapunk believes what we pretty much already know, that the Void Century has a history of, or rather is a history of, conflict between the 20 surviving kingdoms of the world government, the founding kingdoms of the world government, and the ancient kingdom. So we don't know if it was that whole 100 years of Void Century. I assume that was pretty relevant at the beginning of those 100 years to the end of those 100 years. Otherwise, it would have been the 50-year century, or the half century void, or whatever. So let's presume that the whole 100 years between 800 and 900 years ago was the Void Century, and that was the conflict between the ancient kingdoms the Ancient Kingdom, and the 20 world government families. When the Ancient Kingdom lost that conflict, the 20 families formed together into the world government, erased all information about the Ancient Kingdom, and then kind of re-kickstarted the world into the world that we see now, controlled, and either you're affiliated with the world government or you're pretty much ransacked and killed by people that aren't the world government as well as the world government. So it's not a great start off, but we know that because the Ancient Kingdom lost, they were erased from history, and the world government was responsible for it because they were the ones who did the erasing. So they are now trying to keep that secret covered up in any way they possibly can, which is why they annihilated O'Hara, which is why they are hunting for Robin, which is also why they don't want anyone to find Laugh Tale and the One Piece, because the One Piece is most likely just a part of something of the Ancient Kingdom. I do love the Straw Hats' reactions here, because this is pretty much something that we've known for years, maybe a decade or two now, that the world government erased this kingdom from existence, and the world government erases things from existence. This is something very common knowledge to us now at this point. And all of the Straw Hats that are present are shocked by this. Nami thinks it's wild. Usopp just can't believe his ears. Sanji is like indignant about this, and Frankie is like, oh my god, that's so cool. They got wiped out of existence. What a romantic story. It was a very weird kind of reaction from Frankie. Not weird for Frankie, just a strange reaction. What an epic and romantic tale. Very much like Romance Dawn, the lust for adventure, which is one of the central themes of One Piece, really. I thought that was pretty cool. Vegapunk here is essentially just trying to get the story straight and confirm why O'Hara was wiped out. To us, that's very easy. That's the one question that we can answer that Vegapunk couldn't up until now. Why was O'Hara eliminated? Well, because they were getting too close to understanding the Ancient Kingdom. I think they might have even had the name of the Ancient Kingdom, which even knowing that is too much, because apparently that links up so much to this forbidden information. But he's trying to just talk to Robin here and confirm that O'Hara was wiped out because of that discovery. This is not something well known in the One Piece world. It is very well known in our world, obviously, because that's how O'Hara was kind of introduced to us. But most people in the One Piece world would not know about this. Saul probably doesn't even know about this. And Saul was very, very important in that moment there, but he kind of was crash landed on that island and then got to know Robin, and then it was attacked. I don't think he knows anything about the Ancient Kingdom, especially because even someone as amazingly useful as Vegapunk would be immediately erased just for asking about the Ancient Kingdom. So anyone from Akainu to Aokiji to Saul to any of the Marines involved in the Buster Call, as well as anyone who is trying to cover it up subsequently, probably doesn't know much about it, except for the really high-ups in the world government, like the Gorosei, like Eam. They would know what happened in the Void Century. But anyone else is just strictly not allowed to have that information. So it takes a certain level of genius and luck to be able to even discover something like this in the world that the world government has created. It took the man with the world's largest brain, as well as all of that information from the scholars, to put it together to even make the conjecture that O'Hara was wiped out because they were getting too close to that truth. Because the world government just spread propaganda to cover up why they obliterated O'Hara. It wasn't specifically to tell everyone not to investigate the Ancient Kingdom, because they don't want anyone to even know about the Ancient Kingdom. So I find it very interesting that we just took a very long and roundabout way to confirm something that we already knew, because the people in the world didn't already know that. So we're establishing a lot of facts, as well as re-establishing a lot of facts for us, because they are suddenly way more relevant. It's also confirmed here that Vegapunk would not know things about the Ancient Kingdom just because he's a high-ranking world government official. Yes, he is involved in the world government. Yes, he's vital to the world government in a lot of areas. And, I guess they're going to assassinate him, so he's not vital. But he's very important and very knowledgeable. They do not trust him, though. Just because he's high up in the world government or high up in the Marines or the Navy doesn't mean that they're going to tell him their state secrets. They're going to let him in on a lot of other secrets, like devil fruits, what actually happened to this island, what is actually found at that island, things like that, that will help his research to help them. But they are not giving him any information, clearly, that would compromise themselves, which may or may not be why they're trying to assassinate him. I just assume it is slightly different, because he even says in this chapter, if they found out that he was even asking about the Ancient Kingdom, they would immediately eliminate him, just erase him off the face of the planet, like they've done with many people. That would be difficult considering everyone who knows that Vegapunk exists and is a dude. But anyway, I'm assuming that the CP Aegis Zero are here to eliminate him for a reason separate to the Ancient Kingdom. Either they assume he's getting too close to it and they want to wipe him out, which seems a bit of a weird assumption to make, or he's done something else, or something else has come up, like they have the Seraphim and they want to just eliminate him to use his technology, but not to the meddlesome Vegapunk. So we know that Vegapunk is a good guy. He's on the good guy's side. He knows a lot of the good people that we know, and he is against the world government here. He's just using them for the funding, basically. But we kind of assumed before that he would know about the Ancient Kingdom and things like that because he's a high-ranking member of the world government, as Robin, kind of posits here. But that is plainly untrue. They won't tell him about any of that. They would kill him if he found out. So at least that answers that question. I think Vegapunk is very much going to be on our side, given what we learn in this chapter here. So let's get a little bit further into that. This moment here is huge. I really enjoyed this moment because things are starting to heat up, because we have our 15th close-up shot of Vegapunk Shaka telling us something dramatic with the bold text where he tells us, a few times in this chapter, we have Vegapunk on a close-up with a very bold text kind of stating something very suddenly or very dramatically, and I think it's quite fun. But as the conversation kind of ramps up and we learn more and more things, or we confirm more and more things, it starts to get very convoluted and we go down this winding path, and there's some comedy relief in Usopp and some of the other Straw Hats, which is quite nice. So Robin is actually getting quite passionate through this whole conversation. She even starts shouting and saying, well, how can it be true that the government doesn't trust you if you know what the O'Haran scholars were trying to get at, and like they were leading in their research, because they wrote it all in their books, and then the whole place was burned down and all of the materials are gone, and Vegapunk just gets another close-up freeze frame dramatic pose and just goes, the will of O'Hara lives on. And that was really cool. That genuinely gave me chills, because Robin is very distressed from this conversation, as you can imagine. It's hard for her to even talk about O'Hara in normal circumstances with people she likes. This government official, Vegapunk, world-renowned scientist, is going to be a bit cold and logical, especially because it's Shaka, and that gets her quite heated in a lot of regards. But he's very much on the good side of this, and he has preserved the will of O'Hara, and that is just such an amazing thing for him to have done. It makes sense because he is a scholar, he is a man of intelligence and research, and is passionate about understanding things and progressing thought, which is, quite admirable. But he's still got such compassion to him, especially towards the people of O'Hara and their one last survivor. So I think that's very, very sweet. So here we get a bit of a retelling of the O'Hara story, which that's really cool. This is something we talked about so long ago in the manga, and to see some of these characters and scenes and panels kind of brought back into the current story. We've done this a lot lately with bringing some really older stuff back, but this is just a huge chunk of nostalgia here. Not great nostalgia for a lot of people, I'll be honest, but as a reading experience, it's just so cool to have these flashbacks to O'Hara and explaining them with more context from a very knowledgeable source. I think it's really, really cool. So Vegapunk kind of reiterates the story that the whole world was shocked that day. O'Hara was wiped out, and everyone knew O'Hara as this place of, the center of love of research and knowledge. These people are scholars, they're peaceful people, and all they want to do is broaden their minds and research things about the world, which is a great goal to have. And then they were just genocided in a single night. They were just wiped off the planet, in what seemed like no time to everyone else. They were just gone. And the only survivor was Robin, who now had a 79 million berry bounty on her for the last surviving O'Haran. And they were all labeled as devils. They were all labeled as evil, which is why Robin's Demonio and, Devil Child Robin is such an important thing for her, and why she's ready to become a devil, because she was labeled as a devil by the world government since she was 8 up until now. So for 22 years, I know it's 22 years, I think she was 8. For 22 years, she's been running from this label of being a devil, about 20 years, because she's accepted it now, because of the false accusations of the world government and the horrible, horrible thing that they did. So it just really gives you a lot of... This is the Robin content we've been really waiting for. When I first read the chapter this morning, I literally screamed, oh my god, it's amazing. Robin's actually like doing things in the story. Like, she's been very, very useful before. She's been critical before even, but this is why she's in the story. She is in the story to explain the O'Hara incident and to talk to a knowledgeable person about what actually happened and what it meant. There is just nobody else really in the world who knows the significance of O'Hara and their discoveries except for this one man. And I've been waiting so long for Robin to be having this conversation and to be so incredibly centrally important to the story. It kind of sucks that Rob Lucci's about to catch up, and that's going to be quite a thing, because he was pretty intent on catching her before. Now it's probably kicked up to a whole new level. So it's very interesting that she's having these very relevant conversations while Rob Lucci is literally on the way to her now. His whole deal has been trying to kill Robin for quite a few years now. So a lot of interesting things are lining up in this chapter. Not quite Rob Lucci yet, but we're getting there. So a few months after the incident at O'Hara, Vegapunk pays a visit to the land that has just been destroyed, because he knew Clover and he wanted to pay his respects, much like Luffy to Ace and anyone else that's really died in the story, who left people behind. Sorry, Brook. And a lot... Oh, I guess there's Laboon. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked. He goes back to the island to visit them and leave some flowers for Clover. And he kind of explains to us that Clover was more reckless in his youth and went out and was captured by the Navy at least 10 times. Like, that gave me very big Kaido vibes. Maybe Clover was just hungry and just got captured for a meal. Who knows? But we get this very interesting view of Clover and how he was actually a pioneer in this field, and he was so intent on research and being a scholar and learning about the world that he actually gathered people to him when he settled down. So he went all over the world and inspired people and learned things and met so many important figures. And then after all those captures and adventures, he settled down on an island to kind of solidify his purpose there, in my view anyway. And that's what O'Hara became. People from all over the world who were passionate about research and scholarship and archaeology flocked towards him and made O'Hara the love of knowledge place that it really turned out to be. I kind of assumed everyone was born there and that's why it did that over time, but it makes a lot more sense for it to be intentionally gathered in one place for a particular purpose. So some very good lore on a character we haven't seen for just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chapters. I guess technically we saw him during the Black Maria fight, but that was just an illusion, so I'm not going to count that. But real Clover has not been in the story for a very long time, and it's really good to be retouching on these things with even greater context. So here is something that I did not think we were going to really be touching on again in the story, but I am so glad that we are. At the outset, end, middle, during the O'Hara incident, a lot of the scholars noticed that the Tree of Knowledge had caught fire, which is not a good thing. The Tree of Knowledge was their huge library. They had so many books stored in there. That was their vault of knowledge, their center of knowledge, the center of knowledge in the world. Like, I don't think there was anywhere else in the world even close to rivaling that much knowledge about anything, because that information would have been about so many things, but some things more particularly. But there was just such a huge collection of information there that was burned, and that's what really made the O'Hara tragedy for a lot of people, myself included. A big part of that tragedy for me was the books being burned, because as we know from history, that's not a great thing to do, but it's a very significant thing to do, because burning knowledge is horrific, especially because in an example like this, a whole world could reach a particular state of advancement, and then something like the world government comes along and burns it and breaks it all down and resets us to a previous state. And the amount of of passion and time and life and everything that is lost in the people that, researched that information and did the experiments and lived throughout that time is all lost. And that's what made the O'Hara incident, other than the genocide, that's what made it a particularly rough thing, because it was humanity and research and knowledge and all of these things that were lost during that, except that the scholars were smart enough, of course, to run over to it and throw all of the books out into the lake nearby. There was a small patch of water right there, and they just threw all the books they could get their hands on out the window. Now, you might think books into a lake is not a great idea. They weren't there for too long, luckily enough, but I mean, after a while, it would certainly damage them. But that is so much more reversible and, manageable than being burnt in a Bastelcore fire. So these scholars threw all of the books into the lake. And when Vegapunk came to visit months after this event has occurred, he saw the burnt tree of knowledge and was just speechless, as anyone would be. Any reasonable person who walked up and saw the tree of knowledge being burnt down would understand the implications of that. And he was just dumbfounded by this. But the thing that surprised him more is when he looked down, he saw a lake with thousands upon thousands of books, countless books that were thrown out of the tree of knowledge. And the person who comes to explain all of this to him is none other than Dragon, Luffy's father, who just so happens to be there at the same time. Who knows what he's doing with him? We'll get to him in a second. And he explains that he spoke to a giant about these books and they were dragging them all out of the lake. So Vegapunk just sees thousands of books in a lake from this burnt down island and giants just reclaiming them all. So Vegapunk, being a very intelligent man, sees all the books at the bottom of the lake in O'Hara and everything's been burned down. And he realizes that the people of O'Hara, the scholars of O'Hara, must have spent their last moments alive saving all of that knowledge, taking all of the knowledge that was being attacked by the world government and preserving it for the future. And he goes on to say that any of the Marines that may have found these books clearly didn't understand their importance or the relevance to the situation at hand, meaning that the scholars of O'Hara won over the world government, despite being eradicated, despite being brutally killed. The scholars still came out on top in that conflict because they preserved all of their findings and their research, at least as much as they could, for the future generations. So Vegapunk says that when he realized that he could hardly stop himself from crying, and I really get that, because we then flash to Nico Olvia, Nico Robin's mother, making that final sacrifice, saying goodbye to her child that she didn't spend any of her time with, really, because she was so busy. What was she doing? She was adventuring, she was doing stuff, but she didn't spend much time with Robin, and Robin felt very outcast. And then she saw her again, and then she had to give up her life, give up her daughter, give up everything to go and preserve all of that information for Robin's future, as Robin would be the only survivor of O'Hara from her mother's plan. So it just hit really hard that Vegapunk, although being the smartest man in the world, is very compassionate, very understanding, very emotionally intelligent man, because just from seeing the books and understanding the situation, he can feel the weight of the decision that the O'Harans made at that time and appreciate it and, feel empathy for them. And I think that's incredible. And it really is just such a wonderful part of the story. Yes, it's a terrible tragedy in the world of One Piece, but on the side of the right, the side of the O'Harans and the side of kind of Vegapunk here, Nico, Olvia, and Sol, they really made such, valiant? They made such amazing decisions, and they made such compassionate decisions to save the knowledge of the world as well as Robin, to be the key to unlocking it later. So, as we talked about a little bit ago, the people that were saving the books from the lake were the giants. And Vegapunk saw these giants and wondered if they knew the importance of those books, and Dragon comes out from behind him to explain the situation. Now, before we get into that, I don't know why this always surprises me. It happened with Shimotsuki Kozaburo, one of my favorite One Piece characters ever, despite only having like 6 lines. This happens with with Luffy in his Bound Man form. This just happens all the time, and I don't know how I keep getting surprised by it. But we finally know what Vegapunk looks like. And I don't know why I expected anything different, but he looks so goofy. But even if I expect goofy, it never matches up to what Oda actually does. Oda surpasses my expectations in so many ways on so many different occasions, and this is simply no different. Even though I saw all the different forms of Vegapunk, I still, for some reason, assumed that Vegapunk would just be a long-headed old man. Like, that's just kind of what I thought it would be. How much more complicated could it be? Because that seems kind of wacky, but no. It has to be this. And that just threw me, because when we saw him a little bit earlier in the reverse silhouette, which is, he was even silhouetted up till halfway through this chapter, I just kind of went, no, we're not doing this. That's Vegapunk. Hang on, that's Vegapunk. And then as I read through the chapter a little bit more, we actually get the face reveal of Vegapunk. And I had a really good laugh at that. I think it's wonderful. I think it's amazing that even despite it's actually raining quite a lot today, even despite these really intense themes, we were talking about the Ohara incident, which is genuinely one of the roughest things that has happened in One Piece. That's really up there for tragedies. And Oda made me laugh so hard while we were discussing that. And I just think that's a wonderful thing for a person to be able to do. He's never met me, has no idea I exist, probably never will. And yet he can surprise me and make me laugh so much. And I think that's great. So anyway, now we see this very cool shot of Vegapunk with his tie. No, sorry, not tie. I mispronounced that. His tongue. I love you, Oda. And he's quite surprised to see Dragon. And Dragon hasn't changed much. He looks very Super Saiyan to me, and I'm getting strong Luffy vibes here because we just came out of Wano, and they have a very similar kind of aesthetic going on here. But here we have Dragon at 33 and Vegapunk at 43. And the full body reveal for Vegapunk, that sounds really weird. I gotta stop doing that. And yeah, I mean, I did say on, I think it was Reddit a while ago, that he's definitely going to be a long-headed man, which is why the first Lilith Vegapunk we saw was definitely not the only Vegapunk. And I was right, he is a long-head member, but to such an abnormal extreme. Either he's a long-head member, and all long-head members are generally smarter and get smarter over time, or he's not a Longhead tribe member and he's just really smart and his brain actually just takes up that much space. We do know that Dragon says here, or we rather see Dragon saying here, that his head has gotten longer since the last time he saw him. And the only other people that we've confirmed got that for would be Vice Admiral Strawberry and Fukurokuju. We know that Vice Admiral Strawberry's head actually gets longer every time he gets sad, which is one of the most depressing but entertaining things I've ever heard, particularly on One Piece. So I wonder if any member of the Longhead tribe gets a longer head every time they experience sadness, because Fukurokuju took over as the Oniwabanshu leader for Orochi, and his head was, pretty reasonably sized at that time, and now he's gotten quite up there. I think Strawberry's probably still got the longest forehead in One Piece, but I wonder if it's all due to sadness. That's quite interesting. Anyway, let's talk about why Dragon's here. So Dragon does seem quite concerned about Vegapunk being here, but he first asks him if he's curious about the giants being there and whether they're scavengers or not. He does confirm that he did speak to them, or rather, Dragon confirms that Dragon spoke to them recently, and he understands now that they were sent by their giant captain who told them to recover the books because he knows the value of those books. We know that Dragon's group was called the Freedom Fighters. I assume that's just a small ragtag group of people that are opposing the world government just kind of generally, and he invited Vegapunk to join this group, but Vegapunk says no because they didn't have enough money, and he's a genius and he needs to be building things and inventing things, and he needs a lot of funding to do so, which we now know is why he's with the world government. We even heard this from the last chapter, but specifically didn't go with Dragon, not on a moral standpoint, but on a financial standpoint, which I don't really agree with a lot of things like that. I'm not a very financial kind of person, but it makes complete logical sense, and I'm a very logical person. So I'm, don't hold anything against Vegapunk for siding with the world government to achieve the things he needed and wanted to achieve. he needed millions upon millions, if not billions, of berry to be able to do these things. And that was his only recourse. And now he's built phenomenal pieces of technology because of that. If he sided with Dragon, yes, he would have had the moral victory, but he wouldn't have invented nearly to his capacity. Small thing to note here, Vegapunk says, there are still good people in the Marines. Some of them can be reasoned with internally. Don't lose sight of the end goal, Dragon. Now, I'm assuming that's just the overthrowing of the world government. There's probably, like Luffy, a bigger reason behind his dream, because Luffy's real dream is not to become the Pirate King. Being the Pirate King is just a prerequisite of that dream. I think overthrowing the world government is the prerequisite to having a happier world, or a particular kind of world that they're envisioning. So, barring any other, stranger thoughts that might be more accurate, the end goal in my mind is the toppling of the world government and re-establishing of the world order. The correct world order in their eyes, that is. A very interesting thing here is we find out that Dragon's big burning passion probably started a bit before this, but his drive really starts now, because he was already a member of the Freedom Fighters and wanted Vegapunk on his side. But it's this triggering, this event on Ohara, which may or may not have to do with Luffy's mother, possibly. I don't think he needs to have that level of personal involvement in it to care about it that much. I think that's kind of like the whole point of this, but it could be either one. But it is the destruction of Ohara and the genocide of these scholars that really sends him over the edge, because these scholars were doing nothing wrong but questioning their authority, which that's a perfectly fine thing to do. If you don't question your authority, then you just kind of are puppeteered around, and that's not ideal in any circumstances, really. But these harmless scholars, these peaceful, knowledge-loving people are wiped out for asking the wrong questions, and he can't abide by that. And that is what starts him on his path to forming the Revolutionary Army. The Revolutionary Army, confirmed now to be begun by Dragon, headed by Dragon, Ivankov, and Kuma. Those are the three big names of the Revolutionary Army. A lot of people kind of assumed that the Revolutionary Army was already a thing, and then he rose in ranks and then began to lead it and all that kind of thing. But confirmed here easily, Dragon is the one who started the Revolutionary Army. He did start it after he had something called Freedom Fighters, but this was probably a lot more aggressively focused on the world government and how he actually wants to combat them a lot more aggressively. So it's nice to have the confirmation of that here and really see the impetus of Dragon's drive to be the man that he is in present day. Dragon says here, I'm going to raise an army that can fight them head on. Translation might be a bit weird, but I'm going to raise an army and I'm going to fight the world government. The way that we're doing things now is not sufficient enough. We need to take the fight to them. And Vegapunk is just very surprised and goes, I thought you hated war. And that's very, very interesting because, Dragon is the leader of the Revolutionary Army. His whole thing is war against the world government. It's very interesting that Vegapunk knows for a fact that Dragon dislikes war. So that is definitely alluding to more in Dragon's past that we'll touch on later, presumably. Dragon is a peace-loving man who was then triggered to bring war to the world government. And that's not the impression I got originally, but it makes him a much more endearing character. Dragon says here, just you watch Vegapunk, I'll change the world. And that's huge. That's Kaido talk, that's Luffy talk, that's Gold Roger talk, Goldie Roger talk. That's these great men talk about changing the world. King believed that Kaido was the only one who could change the world. So that's Joy Boy talk. Very, very important. And that also shines a lot of light to when Dragon was indirectly talking to Luffy. He was kind of looking out onto the world and saying, yes, Luffy, the world is waiting for our answer. Do what you see fit and just kind of go into the world at your own pace or, for your own reasons. I think Dragon and Luffy are going to turn out to be very similar characters, but their difference is how they were kind of responding to things that happened in their lives. So world-shaking developments aside for now, Vegapunk made a trip to Elbaf, which is where the giants were from, that were sent to grab the books and take them back. So he made a very quiet, very stealthy trip into Elbaf, so the world government didn't find out, so that he could learn the fate of these books and what actually happened to them. And there he met a giant captain who was wrapped in bandages who allowed him to read all of the books. This giant captain wrapped in bandages, as I thought and as you know now, is actually Saul from Robin's backstory, which was amazing. I was so happy to hear that he was still around. Saul was a great character. I really liked his introduction. I really liked his motivation. I really liked him as a character and what he stood for and what he did for Robin. Even that silly laugh of his, what was it? Daddy she. I think that was really funny. And just how it motivated Robin to laugh in times of crisis in the same way. It was very cute. But I'm so glad that he is still alive. Nobody dies in One Piece. Sorry, people who died in One Piece. Nobody dies in One Piece. And he meets Saul there at the island, and Saul allows him to read the books. Because Saul knows Robin, Saul was there on the day of Ohara, he knows the significance of the books, and he allowed him to read all of the books. And now we know Vegapunk read every single book that survived Ohara. Every book, every theory, everything that they knew in Ohara is now stored in Vegapunk's head, and he continued their research. That is unbelievable. I never could have theorized that, but I'm so glad it's happened. Not only is the Will of Ohara not dead because Dragon was motivated by Clover's death and the incident at Ohara, but their actual research and the path that they were going along is now being continued by the best man possible, Dr. Vegapunk. He took in all of that knowledge and then furthered it, because that's what he does as a scholar. He furthers every process of thought he can. And I really like Vegapunk as a character. I kind of thought he would be quite cool or very inventive, but he's actually a very appealing kind of character. He's very endearing, he's very empathetic, he's very intelligent. He's really, really quite an amazing character so far. We'll find out more about him, but his design is wacky. He's split himself up, he's compassionate, he's forward-thinking, he's really cares about the plight of other people and is trying to forward the world in a very positive way. There's a very sweet moment here of Robin who's just hearing Vegapunk say this whole story and what happened with the books and how all of that information is in his head and still going forward. And she just kind of breathes a sigh of relief. And she says, "Thank you, Vegapunk, for not letting Ohara's sacrifice be in vain." And that's the kind of closure that I just never thought we would get. I thought Robin would have importance to the story and her past would be a scarring kind of thing, and she just kind of had to live through it to get to the more valuable bits later, the more important bits later that she, obviously appreciates having a crew and all the people that she was searching for. But for Vegapunk to be continuing their work and to talk directly to Robin and explain the story, and for her to be able to say, "Thank you for that, and thank you for saving all of the information that my mother and all those people tried so hard to preserve," that really hit me quite hard. It was, what an amazing chapter this is. And then they all get dragged to the next room. I forgot about this. So the cool shoes that they were wearing that I didn't talk about much in the last chapter were a lot more relevant than I was giving them credit for. I did kind of think, hey, we're really focusing on these shoes. I wonder if they're going to be important. Yes, they're important twice in this chapter. One, they have been magnetized to the floor since earlier, I think. Was that this chapter or last chapter? They've been magnetized to the floor because of their shoes. And then Vegapunk's like, "Come with me, I need to show you something. I can't release you yet." And the shoes just drag them along the floor. Of course, Nami is balanced, but is showing off her ass because, of course, Sanji and Robin are fine with it. Frankie's a bit taken aback. Usopp is just being dragged on his back along the floor. I thought that was fantastic. I don't know if that's because he was hitting his head on the ground or just because his core muscles are too weak. But either way, I thought it was great. And now we're going to cut over to where Luffy is again. So one of the things that happens in pretty much every arc is at the beginning of the arc, there's a big separation and people go to two different places. Sometimes we find something really important here. It usually parallels something really important there, and they're usually connected. In this, we found the giant robot that connected Vegapunk Shaka's story to where Luffy is, where they find out that the Ancient Kingdom was technologically advanced at the same time as Vegapunk explained it. I thought that was kind of it. I thought that was the crescendo. I thought that was the peak of where those things were kind of connecting. That is not true, because Shaka Vegapunk is talking to all of the other Straw Hats and explaining these things at the same time that Luffy makes that discovery. And then just as they are leaving their situation, Vegapunk arrives in front of Luffy. The main stellar body, most likely, just kind of arrives there, which I didn't expect in the slightest, but you know, what else is new here? But before we go directly into that, they're just kind of trying to talk to this robot to get it to move. And there's a very cute gag here with Luffy. Maybe we just have to call it by its name, and he calls it Robonosuke. Not necessarily just from Momonosuke, but because of Ryunosuke, I'm guessing. So I guess he met Momo first, and then, what was his name? Kanjuro drew that dragon for them to get up Zo, and he named it Ryunosuke. So maybe, I don't know if it was Luffy who named that, but anyway, he just kind of names things in a very general way, and it's very funny that Robonosuke is what he calls it, but I wonder if, connecting to this other theory I want to talk about, it might have something to do with Wano. But for now, let's just keep talking about Vegapunk. So, suddenly, there's a huge noise, Luffy gets blown away, and something appears. And it is half of Vegapunk. Vegapunk is for some reason halfway stuck into this giant robot from the last chapter. And Luffy just says, oh my god, there's somebody like Kinemon here, which I think was great. Especially because that was at Vegapunk's Punk Hazard laboratory. So that was quite cool. And he's putting him out of the robot, which probably, if not definitely, has something to do with that giant steel door in the last chapter. So they can pass through that door and then it becomes solid again. So the robot is solid. Vegapunk just has a technology that lets him apparently warp in as well as go through metal. So I think he was trying to appear on top of the robot because Luffy is there and he knew Dragon's son would be there somehow, and he wanted to talk specifically to him, or he needed to go there right at that time for another reason, which seems a little bit unusual to me. But he appears halfway through the robot because he warped in apparently slightly wrong, and then Luffy pulls him out. And this was so stock because Bonnie goes, it's him! And Vegapunk goes, oh, much obliged. You're Dragon's son, right? I thought you'd come. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, yes, you know Luffy from the bounty posters. Yes, you know Dragon. Most other people in the world didn't know about that until Marineford. Maybe that's how he knew about it. It was revealed to the world, but it was just so quick that he instantly sees Luffy and goes, oh, you're Dragon's son. Cool, I'm glad you arrived here. That really caught me off guard. He then recognizes Bonnie because Bonnie is Bartholomew Kuma's daughter, and you know, goes, oh, you've grown up. So all of these things we've been theorizing about for years. Is Kuma Bonnie's father or grandfather, or is it the other way around? Is she actually older and uses the fruit to make herself younger? Is she younger and uses the fruit to make herself older? Those are questions we had for a long time, and Oda just kind of, you know, ticked them off like that. Yes, that is his daughter. Yes, she was a child and then grew up. Like, it's going kind of wild there. But, yeah, he doesn't really seem that phased about it for some reason. Bonnie's very angry, understandably, because she doesn't know the full story about what happened to Kuma. Granted, neither do we, but Vegapunk doesn't seem too concerned about it. And he goes, oh, you know, those shoes you're wearing can actually, you know, like, make you fly. You can float. So they rocket off the ground really strongly, and we get a bit of a freeze frame on Vegapunk's wacky face. Now, this chapter was a lot. This didn't feel like it was going super fast or going all over the place like a lot of fight chapters or recent chapters have, because we're kind of cutting here and there and answering a whole lot of questions and raising a whole bunch more. This chapter was a lot more of a slow progression through what we were talking about, but just so much information came out in one go. So yeah, we answered a lot of questions here and solved a lot of mysteries that we've had for literally decades now, but still we're asking so many more questions. What happened with Kuma? Why has he gone from a leader of the Revolutionary Army to the situation he's in now? Why did Vegapunk change him into a cyborg? Why did he agree? Why did he also let him protect the ship of the Thousand Sunnies? Is it because he knew that it was Dragon's son's ship? Or is it because he knows that Luffy's important to the world? Does he even care about Joy Boy? Does he know about Joy Boy? He must know about Joy Boy. Why is his head no longer big, but it's an apple? Is it because it got split into the bodies? How did he split himself into all the bodies? There are just so many questions going on right now, despite us answering so many more. So, Why does he say quasar at the end of his thing? Is that just his speech pattern? Whew. Okay, so this chapter was really, really, really big. A lot of important things that we've been waiting a really long time for have finally happened, and I am so glad for that. But my mind is all over the place. I have this whole other theory I want to talk about with regards to what the One Piece could actually be. So I'll talk about that in 2 minutes before we finish the video, and then I'll do a whole other video on that. So for now, oh, what a chapter. 1066. Oh my god, that was insanity. There are probably so many more details that I've missed. I've read this chapter like 7 times already today, and I'm probably going to read it another 7 because it's so big. But I just kind of wanted to talk about these things, mention a few things, ask a few questions, draw a few parallels, and then kind of jump into it for a couple of other videos as well as what's happening in the next chapter. There is no break next week, and I am so glad because I have questions, Oda. I have so many questions, and I'm excited to get into them. But I am planning to do what is the One Piece theory video, because this chapter changes so much about my ideas about that. But if you don't want to stick around for those spoilers and you're just okay with the spoilers that we've covered up until now, then thanks for watching. But yeah, this is your last chance to jump off. I'm just going to do this right at the end. So, the One Piece. The One Piece has got to be something that made Roger laugh, something that is instantly recognizable and Joy Boy would have put there, presumably. So I'm assuming it comes from the Ancient Kingdom, and it explains a lot of the mysteries that we just talked about in this chapter in one go. So I think that the One Piece has got to be a bit of technology from the Ancient Kingdom, from the Void Century. So if Roger saw something that confirmed that the Ancient Kingdom was super technologically advanced, that it would have been super helpful on his journey or was vital to him in some way, but not at the end of his journey, he would have done with that at the beginning of the journey. I don't know, like a gun or something. I guess there are guns in the One Piece world, but I think he's seen something that trivializes his journey or trivializes the journey he took to understanding these things. So by the end of his journey, he learned about the Void Century and what the world government was covering up. He heard about it from some of the poneglyphs and reading some of the poneglyphs, and he's heard about it. But then he got to Laugh Tale and he saw one thing. He just saw something that he could only laugh at, because he went through the world's most challenging gauntlet, fighting against pirates and the world government and the Marines and being chased and having adventures and fighting brutal fights and going through all of that to reach this one thing at the end of the world. And all he could do when he saw it is laugh. So I think it's just a small piece of technology. For what piece of technology, I don't know. Please let me know if you can figure it out. Just drop a comment. But I think it's got to be something, I don't know, like a medical aid kit or something sufficiently advanced that you could understand that the Ancient Kingdom is technologically advanced, but was also wiped out. So if, you could, Joy Boy, I wish I lived in your era, things would have been a lot easier for him, trivially easier for him. Trivially? This piece of technology or whatever would have made his journey so easy, it is insignificant compared to the journey that he did have. All he could do was laugh, is my interpretation after reading this chapter. So I think the One Piece has got to be just a small part, just one piece of this Ancient Kingdom, this Void Century, advanced civilization. And that is the one thing that made Roger laugh. So if we look at a few other things in the story, we can probably, and this is true, and we look at a few other things in the story, we can probably draw it to being one particular object. But this has influenced my theory on the One Piece and what the One Piece is particularly quite a bit, just because I'm getting such strong, influences of information from learning about the Ancient Kingdom actually being very advanced and what that means for Roger's discovery. I think it has to be a little bit of technology that is instantly recognizable, even from not the Rogers. Like, even if Luffy found it, he would understand something about the world government's past and the past of the world. Just seeing that is enough to explain all of this mystery that has been hidden and buried by the world government. So, I kind of want to talk more about it, because if Wano existed during the Void Century, which I think we learned at the end of Wano because it was the underwater buried, but if Wano existed there and were the only people who could make the poneglyphs, which contain information from the Ancient Kingdom, why were they such close nations that inscribed all this information for them, as well as have Pluton. Because if they were so advanced like we now know they are, and they had ties to Wano, it would make sense that Pluton is a battleship designed in the Ancient Kingdom, one of the ancient weapons, obviously, and hidden under Wano, and then Wano were entrusted with all of that information on the poneglyphs that was then scattered to their trusted nations around the world. Because Shandora had a poneglyph, and that held information about the Ancient Kingdom that they didn't want to be erased. They needed it to exist in the world for a particular amount of time for this particular purpose. So there are so many strings that now connect so much more strongly than they did before that I can't even keep my head straight. So yeah, I'm going to call it there for today. I can always make another video. If there's something I missed, something I didn't understand, something I misconstrued, please just give me a shout. More than happy to admit I missed something, especially today because my brain is fried. So yeah, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, yeah, please just give me a like so I know that you did, or just say a comment that said, hey, I actually got through all of that. That would be very cool. And yeah, join me in the next one for trying to unravel this huge web that now got even more complicated. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.